The objective here is to create some text that is going to appear as if it's moving off the screen, and it's going to cast a shadow on that screen as it does. Now, your first thought might be, why don't you just have the text cast a shadow on the actual screen itself? Now, the issues that you'll run into there are when you create your text and turn it into 3D and create a light for yourself. Now the issue that you'll find is that even though you can cast shadows onto the screen as it is on the video, I'm just going to go through this. The problem is, first of all, that you're going to get a really potentially get a really strange kind of an effect of the lighting on your video. Now the other issue that you'll find cast shadows on is that when you rotate the text, in order for it to actually inhabit that space realistically, rotate it at the same angle as your screen, even though on the video the screen is at a particular angle, the video clip itself is not. So the video clip is actually just straight on to us, even though the projector screen within that video is at an angle. So it's going to be very difficult to match up the shadows without them kind of seeming very skewed. Okay. So you'll see now that even though the text is casting a shadow, it's casting a very unusual shadow across that. So it's kind of hard to see there at the moment, but you'll see it on the video when you look back at this. Okay, so now I have the text rotated. But the light is actually casting a very unusual shadow. It doesn't match up. It's not consistent with the screen itself. Now the way that you get around that, and this is the way that you'll get around casting a shadow on pretty much any plane or surface within a piece of video to make it look as if that text is casting a shadow directly onto that plane, you need to take a few steps basically. Now what you need to use when you're doing this is what's called a shadow plane, or sometimes it's called a shadow catcher. Now the way that this is going to work, I'll just delete the text for a moment, is that I'm going to add a color solid, in this case a white rectangle. And then I'm going to create the text to sit on top of that color solid. I'm going to make this text black. And I'm going to increase the scale so that it roughly sits proportionally to how big I want it to be on that screen. Now I'm going to be moving this white solid around in 3D space, and I want the text to follow that plane as I do. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to parent the text to the white solid. Make both of them 3D. And with my playhead at the first frame, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale that down a bit and rotate it in 3D space. Now I'm going to make my video layer 2D. That's the next thing I need to do. I do not want my 3D objects, in this case my text and my shadow plane, to interact with that layer of video. So I'll switch that back to 2D, where they don't have any interaction. Now I'm going to have to tweak this for a while just to get it to match up. It's obviously way too big there, so I'll bring that in. Rotate it more. I need more of an angle here, so it's obviously not matching up with the angle of the screen. And let's scale that up a little bit, or down rather. Oops. Okay, now this is roughly where I want it to be. I'm not going to spend ages fine-tuning this in front of you, but I'll give you the file at the end and you'll be able to... Okay. Now that's pretty much matching up the actual projector screen. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull this text out a little bit on its local z-axis so it comes away, whoops, from the white solid. Now I'm going to split my views into two here so that I can look down directly on my 3D layers and I can see the effect here in my active camera layer. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a light to cast a shadow. I'll leave it as a point light, that's fine. Now the idea with this particular clip is that I want it to look as if this light is casting the shadow on that text, casting the shadow, sorry, that light is shining on that text and the text is casting a shadow onto the projector screen. So I'll position the light where I would see it matching up. So if you see on the top view there, I'm pulling it so that it's directly on front of the text as the light is here, and I'm repositioning that light up there. So I'm simulating the light coming from the actual light in the video with my artificial light here. Now I need to set up these lights, this light, so that it casts a shadow. It does. I cast a shadow 100% darkness. I'll leave it like that for the moment. Diffusion at 0 for the moment. That's fine as well. Now I need to go to the material options of the text. Make sure that it casts shadows. So you can see the shadow being cast there now. Now at this point what I can do is go back into the light, fine-tune that a little bit. I can take down the darkness and I can up the diffusion a little bit just to make it look a little bit more natural. Now lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to OK that, and I'm going to do some work on my shadow catcher. Now the idea here with the shadow catcher is that it's not going to be visible. All I want from this shadow catcher is a white area where the screen is and a dark area where the shadow is. So in order for me to kill this kind of grading or fall off of light to dark, I'm going to go down to my white solid layer and I'm going to go to the material options and I'm going to turn off accepts lights. Now watch what happens when I turn that off. It ignores the effect of the light in terms of the intensity and the fall off, but it leaves the shadow. I'm going to go back into the light for a moment and just darken that shadow a little bit. Now this is where the integrating of the shadow and the screen takes place. So let's just talk about this for a moment. What I have here is I have a white solid with a dark shadow on it. Now if I want that shadow to be cast on the screen, all I need to do is to turn the blend mode of the white solid from normal to multiply. It's going to multiply the white part of the shadow catcher with the layer below it, in this case the video, and because white has a value of 1, it's not going to alter the color of the video beneath it. But where it's dark, it's going to multiply a lesser value than 1 with the video below it, and it's going to give a darker version of that video layer. So that's how multiply works. So if I switch this to multiply, the white screen will disappear and the shadow will remain on the screen. Okay? Now at this point, what I can do is I can select my text, just play around with that just a little bit, just so that you can see the difference there. Now it's all about fine-tuning from here on in. Bring the shadow darkness down, bring the shadow diffusion up, and then play around with the shadow itself by moving the text further away from that shadow catcher. Okay? Now, if I want this to be believable for this handheld piece, then obviously I need to do a little bit of tracking. So what I'll do is I'll quickly track the position of the projector screen, and then I'll be able to match up the position of the white shadow catcher with that screen. Now I'll tell you now that the result won't be perfect for this because there's a significant amount of movement on the screen. So I'll match it up or track it, and you should see a fairly accurate tracking. Okay, so track motion, tracker 1, transform position. That's all I want for the moment. So I'll just pull that down there, leave it on a fairly easily tracked area, the corner of that, and increase the size of the search region. So I should be able to track this successfully forward without losing it. This is just going to give me the position. Now there are going to be, see, the problem with this is that there's so much movement in terms of the camera rolling that the screen actually kind of rotates. You can see it happening there. So it's not going to match up perfectly in those points, but you'll still see a pretty nice result. So now I've got my tracking done. I'll go to the target, select the white solid. Don't forget the text is parented to the solid, so I only need to target the white solid and the text will follow it. I'll click OK and apply. Now I'll need to go back now and just reposition the anchor point of the white solid. Now at this point I can change this back to normal if I want, just so I can see it again. And I'll open up the anchor property and position that back to where it needs to be. Now I may also need to adjust its anchor along the Z and then reposition it. So all I'm doing is matching it back up just using the anchor point, and then just drag the playhead and you'll see it matches it okay. It does lose it quite a bit, but when I switch off that, or when I change that back to multiply, then it won't be as noticeable. Okay, so the last thing I need to do now, because the camera is moving and the light is also moving within that shot, I also need to parent the light to the white solid as well. And when I do, you'll see that the light, the text and the shadow catcher are all moving together. So if I was to just do a RAM preview now, you'll see that the text casts that shadow and the shadow follows the screen throughout the shot. Last thing I'm going to do here is just to give a little bit more of a demonstration of how that shadow is going to be more dynamic, is to do a simple Z animation, or animate the text along its Z axis to start it closer to the shadow catcher, where you'll have less of a shadow, or no shadow in this case, and do a simple position parameter change here. I'll just render that out. Now there's nothing stopping you at this point from going to any of the other text animations that you could do using animators. So another example of what you could do here is to use a wiggly selector to pull the text in and out, or to have it kind of explode or move slowly kind of randomly off the screen as well. So the text explosion is just as apt for this and could look quite well if the shadows were managed correctly as well. So the important thing to remember here is that you are just going to increase the diffusion a little bit there. Is that you're using a shadow catcher or a shadow plane to actually catch that shadow. The shadow is not being caught by the video layer, but the video layer is blending with the shadow catcher using the multiply composite. Everything after that really is down to your own kind of problem solving about how you would match up the movement, and it'll also, a lot of it will have to do with what you've actually shot. Now remember that you need to parent the text and the light to the shadow catcher in this case to match everything up perfectly with the scene. Now if I wanted to here, I could pull the light down a little bit. I could still pretty much replicate what I want from that, and the shadow just won't go quite as far down